What if everything you believed about the human species was a carefully orchestrated lie? What if the gentle, diplomatic creatures who joined the Galactic Council 3 centuries ago were merely wearing a mask? What if beneath that facade of peaceful cooperation lurked something so terrifying that it could unravel the very fabric of our understanding of power, war, and survival itself? The Zephyrians thought they knew humans. The Krillian Empire believed they had them figured out. Even the ancient Vorthac Collective, with their million-year history, assumed these pink-skinned bipeds were just another species to be cataloged, controlled, and eventually consumed. They were all catastrophically wrong. When humanity finally drops their disguise and reveals what they truly are, the galaxy doesn't just tremble, it breaks. What you're about to witness isn't just a story of war or rebellion. It's the moment when every assumption about strength, intelligence, and the nature of survival itself gets torn apart and rebuilt from the ground up. Prepare yourself for a revelation that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about what it means to be human. Because once you see what they're really capable of, there's no going back to the comfortable illusion of safety the galaxy once believed in. The mask is about to fall, and what's underneath will shatter your comprehension. Commander Zvexthala had seen many species surrender in her 3 centuries of service to the Krillian Empire, but she had never witnessed anything quite like this. The human delegation sat across from her in the sterile conference room aboard the orbital station, their faces displaying what her cultural analysis programs identified as resigned acceptance. It should have felt like victory, but something about their calm demeanor made her chitinous shell prickle with unease. The lead human negotiator, a middle-aged female called Ambassador Chun, folded her hands neatly on the polished metal table. Her brown eyes held none of the fear or anger that typically accompanied surrender negotiations. Instead, there was something almost patient about her expression, as if she were waiting for something. The terms are quite reasonable, considering the circumstances. Zvexthala clicked through her translator, reviewing the holographic display floating between them. Earth will provide 70% of its agricultural output to the Empire. Your industrial capacity will be redirected to support our expansion fleets. In exchange, your species will be allowed to maintain basic governance over your homeworld and immediate colonies. Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. We appreciate the Empire's generosity. The Krillian commander's mandibles twitched at the barely perceptible emphasis on the word generosity. These humans were odd creatures. When the Empire had arrived at the borders of human space 6 months ago with a fleet of 5,000 battlecruisers, most species would have immediately begun broadcasting surrender terms. Instead, the humans had politely requested a diplomatic meeting to discuss the situation. For 6 months, they had talked, and talked, and talked some more. They had presented countless proposals, counterproposals, and alternative arrangements. They had shared detailed cultural exchanges, invited Krillian diplomats to tour human worlds, and even provided technological demonstrations of their defensive capabilities. All the while, they had maintained this same pleasant, reasonable demeanor that made Zvexthala feel like she was missing something crucial. The demonstrations had been particularly puzzling. Human military technology was advanced, certainly, but not overwhelmingly so. Their warships were sleek and efficient, their ground forces well-trained and disciplined. By galactic standards, they were perhaps slightly above average. Nothing that would pose a serious threat to an empire that had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade. So why did she feel like she was staring into the maw of a sleeping predator? There is one small matter we need to clarify, Ambassador Chen said, her voice maintaining the same measured tone that had characterized all their negotiations. These terms assume that Earth and her colonies will be joining the Empire as, what would be the correct term? Vassal states. Client worlds, Zvexthala corrected. You will maintain internal autonomy while contributing to the greater imperial cause. It's a standard arrangement. Most species find it quite satisfactory once they adjust to the new order. Of course, Chen's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. And if we were to decline this generous offer? The question hung in the air like a chemical toxin. Around the table, the other human delegates remained perfectly still, their expressions unchanged. Zvexthala felt her combat instincts stirring despite herself. There was something wrong with this entire scenario, but she couldn't identify what. Decline? She repeated, her translator adding a note of incredulity to the words. Ambassador Chun, surely you understand the situation. The Empire has 5,000 battlecruisers positioned at your borders. Your combined fleets number fewer than 800 ships. This is not a negotiation between equals. No, Chun agreed quietly. It isn't. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Ziyxthala found herself studying the humans more carefully. They were such unremarkable creatures physically. Soft-skinned, weak-looking, with primitive sensory organs, and no visible natural weapons. Yet something about the way they held themselves suggested coiled potential, like gravity bombs waiting for a trigger signal. However, Chun continued, before we finalize anything, I believe it would be appropriate to share some information that might affect your decision-making process. What information? Chun reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small data crystal, placing it carefully on the table. Everything you've seen of humanity so far represents what we call our diplomatic face. We found it useful when dealing with other galactic civilizations. It helps prevent misunderstandings. Ziyxthala's compound eyes focused on the crystal. Misunderstandings about what we actually are. The human ambassador's voice had not changed. Her expression remained pleasant and professional. But something fundamental had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The other human delegates were no longer sitting with casual relaxation. Their postures had become alert, predatory. Even their breathing seemed to have synchronized in a way that reminded Ziyxthala uncomfortably of pack hunters. Perhaps, Chin suggested, you should review the contents of that crystal before we continue our discussion. Against her better judgment, Ziyxthala found herself reaching for the data storage device. Her clawed fingers closed around it, and she inserted it into the conference table's holographic display system. The Imperial security protocols scanned it thoroughly, finding no viruses or malicious code. Just raw data files. What am I looking at? She asked as the first images began to materialize. Our real history. The hologram displayed what appeared to be ancient Earth, before humanity had achieved spaceflight. Ziyxthala watched scenes of primitive warfare, expecting to see the typical development patterns of a young civilization. Instead, she found herself observing something that made her internal temperature drop several degrees. Humans were not fighting like typical young species. They were not engaging in simple territorial conflicts or resource disputes. They were systematically exterminating each other with a creativity and efficiency that bordered on artistic. And they were enjoying it. This is from our medieval period, Chun explained conversationally. We called it the 100 Years' War, though it actually lasted longer than that. Please note the tactical innovations. The display showed human warriors using psychological warfare, environmental manipulation, and strategic deception on a scale that most species didn't develop until they had centuries of interstellar experience. They were poisoning water supplies, creating false flag operations, and employing battle strategies that incorporated multiple levels of misdirection. Fascinating, Ziyxthala managed, though her voice sounded strained even to her own auditory receptors. But this is ancient history. Surely your species has evolved beyond such. Oh, this is just the beginning, Chen interrupted gently. Please continue watching. The holographic timeline advanced to humanity's industrial age. Now, Ziyxthala was seeing warfare conducted with mechanical precision. Humans had weaponized their own planet's weather systems. They were using economic manipulation as a form of siege warfare that could starve entire continents. They had developed psychological operations that could turn enemy populations against their own governments without firing a single shot. We called this period the World Wars, Chen narrated. Though world is perhaps a misnomer, since we hadn't yet reached other worlds. These were more like practice sessions. Practice sessions. Ziyxthala felt her exoskeleton beginning to secrete stress hormones. On the display, humans were demonstrating strategic thinking that outpaced anything in the Imperial military academies. They were treating war not as a necessary evil, but as a complex art form requiring innovation, creativity, and absolute dedication to victory. Your species engaged in global warfare for recreation, she asked weakly. Recreation, survival, ideological differences, resource acquisition, territorial expansion, sometimes just because we were bored, Chen listed off casually. Humans are remarkably adaptable when it comes to finding reasons for conflict. We've had peace treaties that lasted less time than the negotiations required to create them. The timeline continued advancing. ZY watched in growing horror as humanity developed nuclear weapons and immediately began planning how to use them against each other. Other species typically achieved nuclear capability and then spent centuries developing safeguards to prevent their own extinction. Humans had created detailed scenarios for global annihilation and then refined those scenarios for maximum effectiveness. The interesting thing about our nuclear age, Chen continued in the same pleasant tone, is that we didn't just build weapons capable of destroying our planet. We built them specifically because we wanted the threat of mutual annihilation to be credible. We spent decades in a Cold War where both sides knew that any conflict would result in the complete destruction of our species, and we considered this a stable arrangement. You threatened yourselves with extinction as a negotiating tactic. Oh, it was much more sophisticated than that. We were threatening each other with extinction while simultaneously developing space programs, creating global communication networks, and advancing our scientific understanding at an unprecedented rate. Humans perform remarkably well under existential pressure. The display now showed humanity's early space exploration efforts. But these weren't the cautious, methodical expansion patterns typical of most species. Humans were launching themselves into the void with technology that had barely been tested, accepting casualty rates that would have caused any rational species to halt their programs immediately. Your early space travelers at a 30% mortality rate, ZY observed, reading the statistical overlay. Closer to 40% if you include the unofficial missions, Chen corrected. We found that humans who volunteered for space exploration were generally the same personality types who had previously volunteered for extremely dangerous military operations. It's a useful demographic overlap. The timeline reached humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. ZY watched as human delegates presented themselves to the Galactic Council with the same pleasant, reasonable demeanor she was experiencing now. They had appeared to be a typical developing species seeking membership in a galactic community. This was 300 years ago, she said. Yes, we call it the Great Masquerade. Masquerade? We realized very quickly that other galactic species viewed warfare as an unfortunate necessity rather than a refined art form. We decided it would be more diplomatic to present ourselves as the sort of peaceful, reasonable civilization that others would find comfortable. So we created our diplomatic face. Chun gestured to herself and the other human delegates. What you've been negotiating with for the past 6 months. And underneath this diplomatic face, we never stopped being what we were. We simply learned to hide it more effectively. The holographic display began showing more recent data. Human colonies that appeared peaceful and agricultural from orbital surveys, but which contained underground manufacturing facilities capable of producing weapons that didn't appear in any galactic databases. Trade ships that could reconfigure themselves into assault vessels within minutes. Civilian populations that had maintained military training regimens disguised as recreational activities. Every human child learns what we call the game, Chen explained. Strategy, tactics, resource management, intelligence gathering, psychological manipulation, all presented as educational entertainment. By the time they reach adulthood, they've been unconsciously absorbing the fundamental principles of warfare for their entire lives. ZY was beginning to understand why her instincts had been screaming warnings. Your entire civilization has been conducting a 3-century intelligence operation. That's a rather limited way to describe it, Chen said. We prefer to think of it as a comprehensive strategic assessment of galactic civilization, combined with long-term positioning for optimal outcomes. Optimal outcomes for what? For when someone eventually forced us to drop the diplomatic face. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, the human delegates had now completely abandoned their relaxed postures. They were sitting with the focused alertness of soldiers waiting for combat orders. Their eyes had lost all warmth, becoming coldly analytical as they assessed potential threat vectors and tactical advantages. The Krillian Empire, Chun continued in that same pleasant voice, has given us the perfect opportunity to demonstrate what humans actually are when we're not pretending to be something else. ZY felt her combat reflexes triggering emergency biochemical responses. You're refusing our terms. Oh no, we're accepting them. Just not in the way you intended. I don't understand. Chen's smile finally reached her eyes, and ZY immediately wished it hadn't. The terms state that Earth will provide 70% of its agricultural output to support the Empire. That's quite acceptable. We'll be happy to provide food supplies to Imperial forces. That's reasonable. The terms also state that our industrial capacity will be redirected to support your expansion fleets. We're fully prepared to begin manufacturing materials for Imperial use. Good. However, the terms don't specify that these materials need to be beneficial to the Empire's continued existence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. ZY-Xthala's tactical analysis systems were now running emergency protocols, but they weren't detecting any immediate physical threats. The humans hadn't moved from their chairs. No weapons had been drawn. The conference room security sensors showed no anomalous activity. Yet every instinct she possessed was screaming that she was in mortal danger. "What exactly are you saying?" she managed. "We're saying that the Krillian Empire has just declared war on a species that has spent the last 300 years preparing for this exact scenario." Chen's voice remained conversational. "You've given us legal justification to demonstrate our actual capabilities. From our perspective, this is quite generous of you." The holographic display changed to show real-time tactical overlays. ZY-Xthala found herself looking at star charts showing the current positions of the Imperial fleet. But the display was also showing other contacts. Thousands of them, ships that hadn't been there an hour ago, appearing throughout the system as if they had materialized from empty space. "Stealth technology," she whispered. "Among other things, we found that most galactic species become extremely uncomfortable when they realize how many human vessels have been observing them without their knowledge. It tends to create trust issues." ZY-Xthala was frantically sending emergency signals to her flagship, but the responses she was receiving made no sense. Her tactical officers were reporting massive sensor ghosts, communication jamming across multiple frequencies, and what appeared to be systematic infiltration of Imperial computer networks by unknown software entities. "This is impossible," she said. "Your technology levels were assessed. We've seen your capabilities." "You've seen what we wanted you to see," Chen corrected. "The diplomatic face extends to more than just our behavior patterns. We've become quite skilled at appearing less advanced than we actually are. It's amazing what you can accomplish when others consistently underestimate your capabilities." The conference room's displays were now showing feeds from across the star system. Imperial battlecruisers were reporting catastrophic system failures. Weapons that wouldn't fire, engines that wouldn't respond, life support systems cycling through emergency protocols. It was as if the entire fleet was being systematically disabled by an invisible enemy. "What did you do?" ZY-Xthala demanded. "We accepted your surrender terms," Chen replied innocently. "We're providing food and manufactured goods to Imperial forces exactly as requested. It's hardly our fault if the Empire's quality control standards are insufficient to detect certain additives." The feeds were showing chaos throughout the Imperial fleet. Krillian officers were collapsing at their posts, their exoskeletons turning strange colors as unknown chemicals interacted with their biochemistry. Others were experiencing what appeared to be complete sensory overload, their compound eyes unable to process visual input that had been carefully calibrated to exploit their neurological weaknesses. "You poisoned an entire fleet?" "We provided exactly what was requested: food and manufactured goods. The Empire's biological and technological vulnerabilities are hardly our responsibility to accommodate." ZY-Xthala was now receiving reports that made her question her own sanity. Human ships were appearing throughout the system, but they weren't behaving like any vessels in the galactic databases. They were moving with impossible acceleration curves, ignoring physical laws that should have torn them apart, and demonstrating weapons technologies that belonged in theoretical journals rather than actual combat. "This isn't possible," she repeated. "The physics alone, human science has always been somewhat unconventional," Chun said. "We tend to view scientific laws as suggestions rather than absolute limitations. It's probably a cultural bias stemming from our evolutionary history of surviving in impossible circumstances." The tactical displays were showing complete Imperial fleet dissolution. Ships were either disabled, destroyed, or fleeing the system in panic. The massive invasion force that had seemed so overwhelming 6 months ago was being systematically eliminated by an enemy that had appeared from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. "How long have you been planning this?" ZY-Xthala asked weakly. "Since the moment your ships appeared at our borders," Chen replied. "Though to be more precise, We've been preparing for some version of this scenario since we first encountered galactic civilization. We learned very early that the galaxy operates on the principle that might makes right. We simply decided to become very, very mighty while appearing to be something else entirely. The conference room's displays were now showing the wider galactic situation. Across Imperial space, reports were flooding in about simultaneous attacks on Krillian installations. Human forces that shouldn't have existed were appearing at strategic locations throughout the Empire, demonstrating levels of coordination and intelligence that implied centuries of preparation. This is a comprehensive invasion, Zyxdala realized. This is a comprehensive education, Chun corrected. We're teaching the galaxy what humans actually are when we're not pretending to be diplomatic. The feeds showed Krillian worlds where the local populations were rising in rebellion, supported by human advisors who had apparently been in place for decades. Imperial administrative centers were experiencing critical system failures as human infiltrators activated sabotage programs that had been dormant for years. Krillian allies were receiving communications from human diplomatic teams, offering very generous terms for switching sides immediately. You've been infiltrating our territory for decades, Zyxdala said. We've been making friends, Chen replied. Humans are quite good at that when we put our minds to it. Most species find us charming once they get to know us, especially when we explain how much better their lives could be under human protection rather than Krillian domination. The strategic implications were staggering. If humans had been conducting infiltration operations throughout Imperial space for decades, if they had been building alliances with subject species while maintaining their peaceful facade, if they had been preparing for this exact scenario, the entire Krillian Empire is under attack, Zyxdala whispered. The entire Krillian Empire is being liberated, Chun corrected gently. Most of your subject species have been quite eager to embrace new management once they understood their options. The displays were showing the collapse of Imperial authority across 17 star systems. It was happening simultaneously, with perfect coordination, suggesting levels of strategic planning that bordered on precognition. Human forces were appearing exactly where they needed to be, with precisely the right resources and intelligence at exactly the optimal moment. This level of coordination is impossible without faster-than-light communication, Zyxdala said desperately. No species has achieved instantaneous galactic coordination. No species you're aware of, Chen replied. Human technological development has followed some very interesting paths during our 3 centuries in galactic space. We've learned to be quite creative when conventional approaches prove insufficient. The conference room fell into silence, except for the sound of Zyxdala's increasingly rapid breathing. Around her, the human delegates waited with the patience of apex predators who had already trapped their prey. The holographic displays continued showing the systematic dismantling of everything the Krillian Empire had built over the past century. What do you want? She finally asked. The same thing we've always wanted, Chen replied. Peace, prosperity, and the right to exist without interference. The difference is that we're no longer willing to pretend that these things can be achieved through purely diplomatic means. And the Empire? The Empire will be offered the same choice we're extending to all galactic civilizations. Join the new order as equals, or be replaced by something more suitable for continued existence. Zyxdala felt the last of her tactical options disappearing. This is conquest. This is evolution, Chen corrected. The galaxy has been operating under the assumption that force determines legitimacy. We're simply demonstrating a more advanced understanding of what force actually means. The displays showed human ships establishing control over key Imperial installations while simultaneously broadcasting diplomatic messages to every species in the galaxy. The messages were polite, reasonable, and absolutely terrifying in their implications. Humanity was announcing its true presence to the galaxy, and the galaxy was about to discover what 300 years of hidden preparation had produced. You planned all of this from the beginning, Zyxdala said. We prepared for this possibility from the beginning, Chen clarified. We hoped it wouldn't be necessary. But humans have learned that hope is most effective when supported by overwhelming tactical superiority. The conference room's displays showed the last Imperial strongholds falling to human forces. It had taken less than 6 hours for an empire that had dominated 17 star systems to cease existing as a coherent entity. The sheer scope and precision of the operation defied everything ZYXTALA thought she knew about warfare, logistics, and strategic planning. "What happens now?" she asked. Ambassador Chun smiled, that pleasant, diplomatic smile that no longer fooled anyone in the room. "Now, the galaxy learns what humanity really is when we stop pretending to be something else." High Chancellor Vrextai of the Zephyrian Confederation had been monitoring the situation in Krillian space with what he had assumed was detached academic interest. The fall of aggressive empires was always a subject worthy of study, particularly when it happened with such unprecedented speed and efficiency. What concerned him now was not the collapse of the Krillian Empire itself, but the implications of how it had happened. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of the first reports reaching civilized space. Representatives from 43 species had gathered in the Great Orbital Assembly, their various forms of biochemistry creating the usual mixture of atmospheric requirements that made these meetings such complex logistical exercises. But, for once, the environmental challenges seemed trivial compared to the information they were trying to process. "The reports must be exaggerated," declared Ambassador Kinth of the Valdorian Trade Alliance, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into nervous patterns. No species could coordinate operations across 17 star systems with such precision. The physics alone would require technological capabilities that exceed anything in our databases. "The physics are the least concerning aspect," responded General Thakmar of the Hegemony Defense Forces. His reptilian features were set in what his species displayed as deep contemplation, but his biochemical markers were broadcasting pure anxiety. "I'm more concerned about the intelligence failures. Human capabilities were assessed repeatedly over 3 centuries. Every major power has conducted detailed evaluations of their military potential." High Chancellor Vrextai accessed his personal files on human assessment reports. The documents painted a picture of a competent but unremarkable species. Advanced by galactic standards, certainly, but well within normal parameters for a civilization that had achieved interstellar travel. Their diplomatic interactions had been consistently peaceful, reasonable, and predictable. They participated in trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts exactly as expected for a species seeking integration into galactic civilization. "Perhaps," suggested Counselor Zathera of the Academic Collective, "we should review the specific details of what occurred rather than speculating about impossibilities." The chamber's central display activated, showing tactical recordings from the Krillian conflict. Vrextai watched with growing unease as the data unfolded. The human operation had been conducted with surgical precision across multiple levels simultaneously. Military action, psychological warfare, economic manipulation, technological sabotage, diplomatic pressure, and social engineering had all been deployed in perfect coordination. "This is graduate-level multidimensional strategy," he murmured, his tentacles unconsciously forming defensive patterns. "Most species require centuries to develop this level of operational sophistication. The humans have had centuries," pointed out Ambassador Kempf. "They've been members of galactic civilization for 300 years. "Yes, but they spent those centuries presenting themselves as peaceful traders and cultural ambassadors," General Thakmar replied. "There's no indication in any intelligence files that they were developing advanced military capabilities." The display showed footage from human colonies that Imperial forces had been monitoring for months. The same colonies that had appeared to be agricultural settlements and research stations were revealing themselves to be sophisticated military installations. Underground manufacturing facilities were producing technologies that hadn't existed in any galactic database. Civilian populations were demonstrating training and coordination that implied decades of preparation. They were hiding in plain sight, Vrextai realized. Every assessment we conducted was based on what they allowed us to see. "But the scale," protested Counselor Zathura, "to maintain deception operations across hundreds of worlds for 3 centuries would require exactly the sort of strategic thinking we're observing," finished Ambassador Kent grimly. "This isn't spontaneous military action. This is the culmination of a 300-year intelligence operation." The implications were staggering. If humans had been conducting systematic deception for 3 centuries, if they had been preparing for large-scale conflict while maintaining peaceful diplomatic relations, if they had achieved technological capabilities beyond anything other species possessed, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about the balance of power was wrong. We need to examine their technological demonstrations more carefully, General Thakmar suggested, calling up files from various human cultural exchanges. They've been showing us their capabilities for centuries. We just weren't interpreting the data correctly. The display showed recordings of human entertainment that had been shared with other species as examples of their cultural development. Vrextai had seen these before and dismissed them as typical violent fiction produced by young civilizations. Now, reviewing them with the understanding that humans might be using entertainment as training material, the content took on a very different significance. Human fictional scenarios demonstrated tactical innovation, strategic thinking, and psychological sophistication that most species didn't develop until they had centuries of actual combat experience. Their entertainment included detailed explorations of complex military operations, intelligence gathering, technology development, and social engineering. What other species had assumed was imaginative storytelling was actually comprehensive education in advanced warfare techniques. They've been teaching their entire population military strategy through entertainment, Vrextai observed with a mixture of admiration and horror. Every human child grows up absorbing sophisticated tactical concepts as recreational material. It's more than that, added Counselor Zithara, highlighting patterns in the data. Their educational systems, their economic structures, their social organization, even their recreational activities, all incorporate elements that would be useful for large-scale military operations. Their entire civilization is designed to function as a unified strategic asset. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence as the representatives processed this information. A species that had weaponized its own culture, that had turned every aspect of civilization into preparation for conflict, that had maintained this level of organization and deception for 3 centuries, represented something unprecedented in galactic history. We need to determine their intentions, General Thakmar said finally. The Krillian Empire was aggressive and expansionist. If humans have eliminated them as a strategic threat, that might actually benefit galactic stability. Or it might mean that humans have identified aggressive expansion as an effective strategy and are eliminating competition before implementing their own version, Vrextai pointed out. We need more information. The display changed to show real-time communications being broadcast from human space. Ambassador Chen appeared on screen, addressing the galaxy with the same pleasant, diplomatic demeanor that had characterized human interactions for 3 centuries. But now, knowing what lay beneath that facade, her words carried implications that made Vrextai's biochemistry spike with stress hormones. People of the galaxy, Chen began, humanity wishes to address recent events in Krillian space and clarify our intentions regarding galactic civilization. Her voice was calm, reasonable, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Around the council chamber, representatives leaned forward despite themselves, desperate to understand what was coming next. For 300 years, humanity has participated in galactic civilization as peaceful partners. We have honored our treaties, respected other species' sovereignty, and contributed to mutual prosperity through trade and cultural exchange. This approach has served us well, and we have no intention of abandoning diplomatic solutions when they remain viable. The pause that followed felt calculated, as if Chun were allowing time for the galaxy to process the subtle threat embedded in her words. However, recent events have demonstrated that some elements of galactic civilization interpret peaceful behavior as weakness. The Krillian Empire's attempt to forcibly subjugate human space represents a fundamental misunderstanding of our nature and capabilities. We have therefore found it necessary to provide educational clarification. Educational clarification. Vrextai felt his tentacles curling involuntarily. The complete destruction of a 17-system empire was being described as educational clarification. Humanity's response to Krillian aggression should not be interpreted as a change in our fundamental approach to galactic relations, Chun continued. We remain committed to peaceful coexistence with all species who share that commitment. However, we are no longer willing to disguise our actual capabilities in the interest of making others feel comfortable. The implications of that statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. If humans have been deliberately concealing their true capabilities for 3 centuries, if what they had just demonstrated was their actual level of advancement, then the entire galactic power structure was based on false assumptions. Going forward, Chen announced, humanity will be offering revised partnership agreements to all galactic civilizations. These agreements will be based on accurate assessments of our respective capabilities rather than the diplomatic fiction we have maintained for the past 3 centuries. Revised partnership agreements. Rextai accessed his government's existing treaties with human space and felt his biochemistry enter full emergency protocols. Every agreement they had negotiated was based on the assumption that humans were a minor power seeking protection through diplomatic alignment. If they were actually the dominant military force in the galaxy, those treaties were completely one-sided in humanity's favor. We understand that this transition may create temporary confusion. Chun continued with that same pleasant smile. Humanity is prepared to provide assistance to any species that requires help adjusting to the new galactic reality. We have extensive experience in managing complex organizational transitions. The threat couldn't have been clearer if she had simply announced military conquest. Assistance in adjusting to new reality was diplomatic language for forced compliance with human demands. Representatives from human space will be contacting all galactic governments within the next standard cycle to schedule discussions about updated relationship frameworks, Chen concluded. We look forward to continuing our productive cooperation under these more honest circumstances. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Rextai looked around at his fellow representatives and saw his own shock reflected in 42 different forms of biological stress response. They had just been told that the galaxy's power structure had fundamentally changed, and they were all expected to accept new terms from a species they had consistently underestimated. She just announced the peaceful conquest of galactic civilization, whispered Ambassador Kempf. She announced the end of the old order and the beginning of human hegemony, corrected General Thakmar. The question is whether they'll allow us to transition voluntarily or whether they'll provide the same educational clarification they gave the Krillian Empire. Rextai was reviewing intelligence reports from across galactic space, and what he found made his situation assessment even worse. Human diplomatic teams were indeed contacting every major government, but they weren't making requests. They were providing notification that human representatives would be arriving to discuss new arrangements. The phrasing was polite and professional, but the underlying message was clearly non-negotiable. More concerning were the reports of human ship movements throughout galactic space. Vessels that hadn't been detected by any sensors were now making themselves visible near key installations and trade routes. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present. A subtle reminder that humans could appear anywhere they wanted without anyone else knowing about it. How do we respond to this? Asked Counselor Zethera. Our entire defensive strategy is based on the assumption that we understand the capabilities of potential threats. If humans have been concealing technological superiority for 3 centuries, then every defensive plan we have is useless. We need to determine whether cooperation or resistance offers the best chance of survival. General Thakmar replied grimly. And we need to make that determination very quickly before they decide that we're taking too long to adjust to the new reality. Rextai was accessing economic data that painted an equally disturbing picture. Human space had been providing critical resources to dozens of species through trade agreements that now appeared to have been negotiated from a position of strength rather than mutual benefit. If humans decided to revise those agreements, entire civilizations could face resource shortages that would cripple their ability to maintain independence. They've been building dependencies while appearing to create partnerships, he realized. Half the galaxy relies on human goods and services. They could strangle our economies without firing a shot. The question, said Ambassador Kempf, is whether they intend to use that leverage for mutual benefit or for domination. Given what we've just observed, replied General Thakmar, I suspect the distinction may be irrelevant from their perspective. The Chamber's communication systems activated to announce an incoming priority transmission. Rextai felt his defensive biochemistry spike as a human figure appeared on the main display. Not Ambassador Chen this time, but a different human in what appeared to be military uniform. Greetings, honored representatives of the Galactic Council. The human began with that same pleasant demeanor that now carried such ominous implications. I am Admiral Sarah Martinez of the Human Defense Force. I've been assigned to serve as liaison for your transition to updated galactic protocols. Transition to updated galactic protocols. The euphemisms were becoming increasingly creative and increasingly threatening. We understand that recent events may have created some confusion about humanity's role in galactic civilization, Admiral Martinez continued. We're prepared to provide clarification and assistance to help your governments adapt to the new strategic environment. She gestured to something off-screen, and the display changed to show star charts highlighting human ship positions throughout galactic space. There were thousands of contacts positioned near every major trade route, military installation, and population center in known space. As you can see, human forces are currently deployed to provide security and stability during this transition period, Martinez explained. We want to assure all galactic governments that these forces are present for protective rather than aggressive purposes. Protective. Brextai found the word choice almost amusing in its transparent dishonesty. Those ships were positioned to control galactic civilization, not protect it. Over the next few standard cycles, human diplomatic teams will be meeting with your governments to discuss updated partnership arrangements, Martinez continued. These discussions will be based on accurate assessments of respective capabilities and will establish new frameworks for mutually beneficial cooperation. Mutually beneficial cooperation enforced by overwhelming military superiority strategically positioned throughout galactic space. We understand that some species may require time to adjust to these new circumstances, Martinez added, and her smile took on a quality that made Vrextai's survival instinct scream warnings. Humanity is prepared to be patient with reasonable adaptation periods. However, we do expect all galactic civilizations to participate constructively in establishing the new order. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in the kind of silence that typically preceded either panic or surrender. Brextai looked around at his fellow representatives and realized that they were all conducting the same mental calculations. Resistance would mean facing the kind of comprehensive destruction that had just eliminated the Krillian Empire. Cooperation would mean accepting subordination to a species that had been deceiving them for 3 centuries. We need to vote on a response, he said finally. What response? Asked Ambassador Kent bitterly. Humans have just announced that they control galactic civilization. We can accept their terms or be replaced by more cooperative governments. There might be alternatives, suggested Counselor Zethera. If we combine our forces, coordinate our response, present a unified front. With what? Demanded General Thakmar. They've demonstrated technological superiority, strategic superiority, intelligence superiority, and operational superiority. What exactly do you propose we coordinate? Vrextai was reviewing the tactical data one more time, hoping to find some factor that might offer alternatives to submission. Instead, he found evidence that made their situation even worse. Human operations against the Krillian Empire had been conducted with restraint. They had disabled rather than destroyed when possible, captured rather than killed when practical, and offered surrender terms to forces that accepted defeat promptly. They were being merciful, he realized with growing dread. What we just witnessed was humans demonstrating their capabilities while minimizing casualties. If we force them to view us as serious threats rather than temporary problems, the implications hung in the air like a chemical weapon. If humans had destroyed the Krillian Empire while exercising restraint, what would they do to opposition that required more serious measures? A motion that we authorize immediate diplomatic contact with human representatives, Vrextai said quietly, to discuss the terms of our transition to the new galactic order. The vote was unanimous. As the council session ended and representatives began returning to their home governments to deliver the news that galactic civilization had just changed owners, Vrextai found himself wondering what other surprises humanity had prepared for the galaxy. If they had concealed this level of capability for 3 centuries, what else were they hiding? He was absolutely certain he didn't want to find out the hard way. The age of human dominance had begun, and the rest of the galaxy was about to learn what that meant for their continued existence. The only question was whether they would learn through peaceful transition or through the kind of educational clarification that had just been demonstrated in Krillian space. Vrextai suspected that decision would be made for them very soon. Dr. Kelthvar had spent her entire career studying xenobiology, but she had never encountered anything quite like what she was observing in the human diplomatic team that had just arrived at Zephyrian Central Command. Ostensibly, they were here to negotiate the updated partnership agreements that Admiral Martinez had mentioned. In reality, They were conducting what could only be described as a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation disguised as diplomatic courtesy. The lead negotiator introduced himself as Director James Harrison, and his credentials identified him as a trade specialist with 30 years of experience in galactic commerce. But Kelthvar's enhanced sensory apparatus was detecting biochemical signatures that suggested extensive combat training, advanced technological augmentation, and psychological conditioning that she associated with intelligence operatives rather than civilian diplomats. We appreciate the Confederation's willingness to discuss updated relationship frameworks, Director Harrison was saying to High Chancellor Vrextai, his voice maintaining the same pleasant tone that seemed to be standard for all human diplomatic interactions. Humanity has found that honest communication about respective capabilities tends to produce more stable long-term arrangements. Kelthvar was using her research equipment to conduct detailed scans of a human delegation, and what she discovered made her question everything she thought she understood about human biology. The individuals sitting across from them weren't exhibiting normal biochemical patterns for their species. Their neural activity was too coordinated, their physical responses too controlled, their sensory awareness too acute. These humans have been extensively modified, she transmitted to the Chancellor through their private biochemical communication network. Genetic enhancement, technological integration, psychological conditioning. They're not baseline human physiology. Vrextai's tentacles tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. We're certainly interested in establishing more honest communication. Perhaps you could clarify what humanity considers to be accurate assessments of respective capabilities. Director Harrison smiled, and Kelthvar's sensors detected micro-expressions that suggested he was accessing information from sources she couldn't identify. Of course, we've prepared a comprehensive briefing on human civilization that should address most questions about our actual status in galactic affairs. The conference room's display systems activated, but instead of showing standard diplomatic presentations, they began displaying information that made Kelthvar's research training scream warnings about impossible data sets. The human population figures alone defied everything she knew about galactic demographics. Current human population stands at approximately 400 billion individuals distributed across 837 planetary systems, Harrison announced conversationally. Though those numbers fluctuate somewhat depending on how you classify our various off-world installations and deep space habitats. 400 billion. The highest population estimates for human space had placed their numbers at perhaps 50 billion across 200 systems. If these figures were accurate, then humans outnumbered every other galactic species combined. These population centers include traditional planetary colonies, orbital habitats, asteroid mining installations, deep space research stations, and various specialized facilities that serve specific functions within our overall infrastructure. Harrison continued, highlighting locations on a star chart that showed human presence throughout galactic space. The map was terrifying in its scope. Red indicators marked confirmed human installations in systems that were supposedly controlled by other species. Blue indicators showed locations that were officially uninhabited but were apparently hosting significant human populations. Green indicators marked systems that were known to be human territory, but which were showing far more development than any previous intelligence had suggested. Dr. Kelthvar, Vrextai transmitted privately. Are these population figures biologically possible for their species? Kelthvar was running calculations based on human reproductive rates and resource requirements, and the numbers weren't adding up. Not unless they fundamentally altered their biological parameters or discovered resource acquisition methods that exceed anything in our databases. Both, actually, Director Harrison said pleasantly, apparently responding to their private communication. Human reproductive biology has been enhanced through genetic modification and technological assistance, and our resource acquisition has been supplemented through technologies that other species haven't yet developed. He had heard their private transmission. Kelthvar felt her defensive biochemistry spike as she realized that human technology was capable of intercepting Zephyrian biological communication methods. That should have been impossible without detailed knowledge of their physiology and access to monitoring equipment that could detect biochemical signals at the molecular level. Enhanced reproductive biology? Vrextai asked carefully. Human gestation periods have been reduced to approximately 4 months, with survival rates exceeding 98%, Harrison explained. Genetic modification has eliminated most hereditary health issues and improved physical and cognitive capabilities across the population. Technological life extension has increased average lifespan to approximately 300 years. The implications were staggering. A species with reduced gestation periods, enhanced survival rates, improved capabilities, and extended lifespans could achieve exponential population growth that would overwhelm galactic resources within centuries. Combined with the technological superiority they had already demonstrated, humans were positioned to dominate through simple demographic pressure, even without military action. Resource acquisition methods, Harrison continued, include matter conversion technologies, dimensional harvesting, temporal extraction, and what we call creative physics applications that allow us to access materials and energy sources that don't appear in standard galactic databases. Kelthvar's scientific training was rebelling against what she was hearing. Dimensional harvesting and temporal extraction were theoretical concepts that most species considered impossible. Creative physics suggested technological capabilities that bordered on reality manipulation. "Could you elaborate on these enhanced acquisition methods?" she asked, her research instincts overcoming diplomatic caution. "Certainly. Human science has always been somewhat unconventional by galactic standards," Harrison replied. "We tend to view natural laws as guidelines rather than absolute restrictions. When conventional approaches prove insufficient, we develop unconventional alternatives." The display changed to show technical diagrams that made Kelthvar's understanding of physics convulse in protest. Humans had apparently developed technologies that could extract resources from parallel dimensions, harvest energy from temporal differentials, and manipulate matter at the subatomic level to create materials that didn't exist in normal space. This level of technological advancement should have taken millennia to develop, she transmitted to Vrextai. Either they're significantly older as a species than we've been told, or their development rate exceeds anything we've ever observed. Both observations are correct, Harrison said, again demonstrating the disturbing ability to intercept their private communications. Human cognitive enhancement has accelerated our research and development capabilities significantly. We've also had access to information sources that other species haven't discovered yet. Information sources. Kelthvar felt her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instincts. What kind of information sources could accelerate technological development to this degree? We've been in contact with several species that achieved advanced development before joining galactic civilization, Harrison explained. Some of them have been quite helpful in sharing insights about physics, engineering, and organizational management. Several species. Vrextai's tentacles were now forming complex stress patterns as he processed the implications. Other advanced species? Not currently members of galactic civilization. That's correct. The galaxy is much more populated than current civilization recognizes. There are at least 37 species with technological capabilities that exceed anything represented on the Galactic Council. Most of them prefer to avoid contact with younger civilizations until those civilizations demonstrate sufficient maturity. The conference room felt like it was shrinking around them. If there were dozens of species more advanced than anything in galactic civilization, if humans had been in contact with these species for centuries, if they had access to technologies and information that exceeded current galactic knowledge, then everything they thought they knew about reality was fundamentally incorrect. Sufficient maturity, vexte repeted carefully. How is that determined? Various criteria. Technological sophistication, social stability, conflict resolution capabilities, resource management efficiency, and ethical development standards, Harrison listed. Most species require several thousand years to meet minimum qualifications for advanced contact. In humans met minimum qualifications approximately 200 years ago. We've been participating in advanced galactic civilization since then, while maintaining our relationships with younger species through the diplomatic protocols you're familiar with. 200 years. Kelthvar realized that humans had been operating on multiple levels of galactic civilization simultaneously. They had maintained their pleasant, peaceful relationships with species like the Zephyrians while developing advanced technologies and forming alliances with civilizations that were so far ahead that they didn't bother with conventional galactic politics. The technologies you've demonstrated, she said, the population figures, the resource acquisition methods, these are all derived from contact with these advanced species? Partially. Human innovation has contributed significantly to our development. We found that our particular approach to problem-solving tends to produce results that other species find unexpected. The display changed to show examples of human technological innovation that had apparently impressed these advanced civilizations. Kelthvar found herself looking at solutions to physics problems that violated several fundamental assumptions about reality. Humans had developed technologies by refusing to accept that certain things were impossible, and their brute force approach to overcoming natural limitations had produced results that more sophisticated species had never considered. You've been conducting research and development in partnership with civilizations that are thousands of years ahead of current galactic standards, Vrextai observed. For the past 2 centuries, yes. Though we've also been developing our own approaches to various challenges. Human creativity tends to produce solutions that even advanced species find innovative. Harrison gestured to the display, which now showed what appeared to be a real-time view of human space. But this wasn't the human space that appeared in galactic databases. This was a vast network of installations, habitats, and technological projects that spanned multiple dimensions and apparently existed partially outside normal space-time. Current human infrastructure includes approximately 12,000 major installations across known space, several hundred research facilities in dimensional pockets, 43 temporal research stations, and various experimental projects that exist in states that don't translate well to conventional physics, Harrison explained conversationally. Kelthvar was beyond scientific shock at this point. She was observing evidence of a civilization that operated on scales and principles that exceeded her ability to comprehend. How long have you been concealing this level of development? We haven't been concealing it so much as operating it in parallel with our conventional diplomatic relationships, Harrison replied. Most species aren't ready for information about advanced galactic civilization. We found it more productive to maintain separate interaction protocols for different levels of development. Separate interaction protocols. The humans have been treating species like the Zephyrians as children, maintaining simplified relationships while conducting their actual civilization at levels that were incomprehensible to younger species. The recent events in Krillian space, Vrextai said carefully, this was considered appropriate for our level of development. The Krillian situation required us to demonstrate capabilities that we normally keep concealed from younger species, Harrison acknowledged. But aggressive expansion attempts by species that lack sufficient development to understand the consequences tend to create problems that affect multiple levels of galactic civilization. The implications were becoming clear. Humans weren't just more advanced than other galactic species. They were operating as representatives of a coalition of advanced civilizations that monitored and managed younger species from behind the scenes. The Krillian Empire had been eliminated not just for threatening human interests, but for disrupting the careful management of galactic development. You're part of a larger organization, Kelthvar realized. This isn't just human expansion. This is intervention by advanced galactic civilization to maintain stability among younger species. That's a reasonably accurate assessment, Harrison confirmed. Though human methods and objectives do tend to be somewhat more direct than our partners typically prefer. We found that younger species often respond better to clear demonstrations of capability rather than subtle guidance. Clear demonstrations of capability. The complete destruction of the Krillian Empire had been an educational tool used by advanced civilization to teach younger species about appropriate behavior. It was a message that conformity to advanced standards would be enforced through whatever means proved necessary. What are the standards? Vrextai asked quietly. What does advanced galactic civilization expect from species like ours? Peaceful development, resource efficiency, social stability, technological responsibility, and cooperation with management of galactic affairs, Harrison replied. Most species find these requirements quite reasonable once they understand the alternative. The alternative? Kelthvar didn't need to ask what happened to species that failed to meet advanced civilization standards. The Krillian Empire had just provided a comprehensive demonstration. The updated partnership agreements you mentioned, Vrextai said, these are actually integration into advanced galactic civilization under human supervision. That's correct. Humanity has been designated as the primary interface between younger species and advanced civilization. We've found that our approach to species integration tends to produce better long-term results than the more traditional methods. The conference room fell silent as both Zephyrians processed the full scope of their situation. They weren't negotiating with an aggressive human empire. They were being evaluated for integration into a galactic civilization that operated on principles and scales that exceeded their comprehension. Humans were the representatives of that civilization who had been assigned to manage their transition from independent species to supervised development. Dr. Kelfar, HFY transmitted through increasingly desperate biochemical signals. What do you recommend? She looked at the human delegation, noting the patient confidence in their postures. They weren't concerned about the Zephyrian response because they knew the outcome was predetermined. Species like theirs would integrate into advanced civilization under human guidance, or they would be replaced by more cooperative alternatives. I recommend we ask about the specific terms of our integration, she replied, and hope that human supervision proves more pleasant than the alternatives. Harrison smiled, apparently pleased by their decision. I'm glad you're approaching this constructively. Human integration programs have been quite successful with species that demonstrate appropriate cooperation. The display changed to show integration protocols that would transform Zephyrian civilization into a supervised extension of human space. Their government would be restructured to interface with human administrative systems. Their technology would be upgraded to meet advanced civilization standards. Their population would be enhanced to improve compatibility with human physiology and psychology. The integration process typically requires between 50 and 100 years to complete, Harrison explained. During this period, your species will receive technological, medical, and educational assistance to facilitate successful transition to advanced civilization standards. 50 to 100 years of supervised development that would culminate in the complete transformation of their species into something compatible with human requirements. It was cultural absorption disguised as technological assistance. But, given the alternatives, Kelfar found herself genuinely grateful that humans had chosen integration over elimination. The Zephyrian Confederation was about to become the Zephyrian Integration Zone under human administration. And, throughout galactic space, dozens of other species were receiving similar offers from human diplomatic teams. The age of independent galactic civilization was ending. The age of human-managed galactic development was beginning, and resistance, as recent events had demonstrated, was not actually an option. Captain Gorvek of the Hegemony Defense Forces had been planning the resistance operation for 3 standard months, ever since his government had received their invitation to join the new galactic order under human supervision. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: coordinate simultaneous strikes against human installations across 12 systems, demonstrate that not every species would submit to human domination, and rally the galaxy's remaining free civilizations to united resistance. The operation should have been impossible for humans to detect or counter. The resistance fleet was composed of ships from 18 different species, using 14 distinct communication protocols, and operating under complete electromagnetic silence. Their target selection had been based on intelligence gathered from sources that had no contact with human space. Their timing was randomized to prevent pattern recognition. Every possible security precaution had been implemented, which was why Captain Gorvek found it so disturbing to receive a polite communication from the human installation they were approaching, transmitted on a frequency that his tactical systems insisted wasn't being broadcast by anyone. "Attention, unidentified vessels," came a pleasant human voice that somehow reached his bridge despite active communication jammers. "This is Commander Lisa Park of the Sanctuary Station Research Facility. We're detecting multiple ships on approach vectors that suggest hostile intent. Could you please clarify your intentions so we can respond appropriately?" Gorvek stared at his communications officer, whose bewildered expression confirmed that none of their equipment was receiving the transmission. Yet Commander Park's voice was clearly audible throughout the bridge, as if she were standing in the room with them. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "our stealth systems show full operational status. According to our instruments, we should be completely invisible to any detection method in the galactic databases." "And yet they know we're here," Gorvek muttered, reviewing the tactical display. The human research station appeared completely defenseless. No visible weapons, no patrol ships, no defensive installations. Just a modest scientific facility studying stellar phenomena in an otherwise empty system. It was exactly the sort of soft target that the Resistance had selected for maximum psychological impact with minimum risk. Demonstrate that human installations were vulnerable, prove that their technological superiority had limits, and show the galaxy that organized resistance was possible. Maintain approach vectors, he ordered. All ships prepare for coordinated assault on my command. The Resistance fleet consisted of 47 vessels representing the best military technology that free galactic civilization could muster. Fast attack ships, heavy cruisers, and specialized assault platforms that incorporated innovations from multiple species. It should have been more than sufficient to overwhelm a single research station. Attention Resistance fleet, Commander Park's voice continued, still somehow bypassing all their communication security. We really do need you to clarify your intentions. Are you planning to attempt destruction of this facility? The casualness of her tone was almost insulting. She wasn't displaying any concern about facing a vastly superior force. She wasn't calling for reinforcements or activating defensive measures. She was asking for clarification as if the Resistance fleet were tourists requesting directions. Sir, his communications officer said nervously, should I respond? Negative. Maintain calm silence. Oh, you don't need to respond verbally, Commander Park said helpfully. We can monitor your tactical preparations quite clearly. Weapons charging, attack formations, target designation protocols. Very professional work. Actually, most species require significantly more time to coordinate multi-ship assault operations. Gorvek felt his combat instincts screaming warnings that his rational mind couldn't process. The humans were somehow monitoring internal ship communications across 14 different protocols simultaneously. They were tracking weapons systems, formation adjustments, and tactical planning in real time. And they were commenting on the Resistance fleet's activities as if observing a training exercise. All ships execute attack pattern alpha, he ordered through the fleet's secured tactical network. 47 warships opened fire simultaneously, unleashing concentrated energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and exotic munitions at the human research station. The combined firepower should have been sufficient to vaporize anything short of a heavily fortified military installation. The weapon's fire reached the station and simply stopped. Energy beams deflected harmlessly into space. Kinetic rounds slowed to a halt and hung motionless before being gently redirected away from the facility. Exotic munitions deactivated before impact, their warheads apparently neutralized by unknown interference. Impressive coordination, Commander Park observed. Though, I should mention that your weapons aren't actually compatible with our defensive systems. Would you like us to adjust our shielding to allow some of your attacks through? We don't want this to be completely one-sided. The research station, which had appeared defenseless moments before, was now surrounded by a barely visible field of distortion that was effortlessly neutralizing the combined firepower of 18 species' most advanced military technology. And the human commander was offering to make the engagement more fair. Sir, his tactical officer reported with a voice that suggested severe psychological stress. Our weapons are having no effect. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Continue attack, Gorvek ordered desperately. All ships switched to secondary weapons systems. The Resistance fleet launched a second wave of attacks using different energy frequencies, alternative munition types, and experimental weapons that most species considered too dangerous for standard deployment. The result was identical. Every weapon was neutralized before impact, leaving the human station completely undamaged. You know, Commander Park said conversationally, we're actually quite interested in your weapons technology. Some of these designs are quite innovative. Would you be willing to share technical specifications? We'd be happy to provide feedback on potential improvements. The casual request for technical data from the weapons that were currently failing to damage her station was the final insult that broke Gorvek's tactical composure. Open full communication channels, he ordered. I want to speak with this human. Captain Gorvek of the Hegemony Defense Forces, he announced. You will surrender this installation immediately or face the consequences of continued resistance. Oh, hello, Captain Gorvek, Commander Park replied pleasantly. We've been expecting you, actually. Your government received integration assistance offers approximately 3 months ago, and our predictive model suggested that military personnel would require demonstration of capability differentials before accepting the new arrangements. They had been expecting him. The humans had predicted that he would organize resistance operations, had anticipated his target selection, and had prepared for this exact scenario. The entire operation had been planned around human expectations rather than resistance objectives. This is a research station, he said desperately. You cannot possibly have sufficient defensive capabilities to withstand sustained assault. Oh, you're absolutely right, Commander Park agreed. This station has no defensive capabilities at all. We're using external assistance for this demonstration. External assistance. Gorvek felt his understanding of the situation sliding toward complete collapse. What external assistance? Well, human defensive technology is actually quite limited compared to some of our partners, Commander Park explained. When we need to demonstrate advanced capabilities, we usually ask for help from species that specialize in defensive systems. The space around the research station began to shimmer as something vast and incomprehensible briefly became visible. Gorvek caught a glimpse of geometric forms that hurt to look at directly, energy patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than space should contain, and technological structures that appear to be built from crystallized mathematics. The architects are particularly good at defensive demonstrations, Commander Park continued as the impossible vision faded back to invisibility. They've been working on physics-based containment systems for several million years. Very reliable technology. Several million years. The architects. Gorvek was beginning to understand that the Resistance fleet wasn't facing human technology at all. They were facing something so far beyond galactic civilization that it existed in conceptual realms rather than physical space. Your partners, he managed to say, these are the advanced species that humanity mentioned in their integration offers. Some of them, yes. The architects specialize in large-scale engineering projects. The weavers work with temporal and dimensional technologies. The gardeners focus on biological and social development. Humans serve as interface specialists for younger species that aren't ready for direct contact with advanced civilization. Interface specialists. Gorvek realized that humans weren't conquering the galaxy at all. They were serving as intermediaries between young galactic civilization and entities that operated on scales that made conventional military resistance meaningless. What do you want? He asked quietly. We want galactic civilization to develop successfully without destroying itself or others, Commander Park replied. Most species achieve this naturally given sufficient time and guidance. Some species require more direct intervention to prevent problematic behavior patterns. Direct intervention. The destruction of the Krillian Empire suddenly made sense from an entirely different perspective. It hadn't been human aggression. It had been advanced civilization using humans as tools to remove a species that was disrupting optimal galactic development. The resistance operations you've been planning, Commander Park continued, are actually quite understandable from your perspective. Most species experience some difficulty accepting guidance from civilizations they can't fully comprehend. However, continued resistance tends to create problems that require increasingly direct solutions. The threat was delivered with the same pleasant tone that characterized all human communication, but Gorvek could feel the weight of incomprehensible power behind her words. Advanced civilization was offering guidance through human intermediaries. Species that refused guidance would be offered increasingly direct alternatives until they either accepted cooperation or were removed as obstacles to galactic stability. What are options? He asked. Your government can accept the integration assistance that human specialists are offering, Commander Park replied. This involves technological upgrades, social development programs, and administrative restructuring that will prepare your species for eventual graduation to independent status within advanced galactic civilization. Eventually graduation to independence. The integration wasn't permanent absorption. It was education and development toward eventual qualification for membership in the community of advanced species. And if we refuse, then you'll be offered alternatives with progressively less pleasant terms until you either accept cooperation or demonstrate that your species isn't suitable for continued existence in this galaxy. The choice was ultimately simple. Cooperate with advanced civilization through human guidance, or be eliminated as a threat to galactic stability. The Resistance fleet was facing entities that operated on million-year timescales and possessed technologies that transcended conventional physics. Military resistance wasn't just futile, it was incomprehensible from their perspective. I need to contact my government, Gorvek said. Of course. Though I should mention that human diplomatic teams are already meeting with your leadership to discuss integration protocols. Your resistance operation was factored into their negotiation timeline. His resistance operation had been predicted, accounted for, and incorporated into human diplomatic strategy. The entire military campaign had been serving human objectives rather than resistance goals. The other ships in this fleet, he said, representatives from 18 species, the governments, are all receiving similar demonstrations customized for their particular psychological and cultural requirements, Commander Park finished. The simultaneous nature of your resistance operation actually made it quite convenient to provide comprehensive education about the new galactic reality. 18 simultaneous demonstrations across 12 systems. Every resistance operation was facing the same overwhelming display of advanced capabilities that made military opposition meaningless. Every species attempting to organize resistance was learning that cooperation with human guidance was their only viable option. Captain Gorvek, Commander Park said gently, "Would you like to tour our research facility? We're conducting some fascinating studies on stellar engineering techniques that might interest you. The architects have shared some quite remarkable innovations in star system optimization." The invitation was offered with genuine warmth, as if the failed military assault had been a minor misunderstanding rather than an attempt at armed resistance. But Gorvek understood what was actually being offered. He could see what advanced galactic civilization was capable of creating, what his species might eventually develop toward, and what they would be missing if they chose continued resistance over cooperative integration. "I would be honored," he replied, ordering his fleet to stand down. As his shuttle approached the human research station, Gorvek found himself wondering what other surprises advanced civilization had prepared for species that continued to view military force as a viable solution to interstellar conflicts. He was certain that he didn't want to discover the answer through continued resistance. The age of military solutions to galactic politics had ended the moment advanced civilization decided to reveal itself through human intermediaries. The only question remaining was whether younger species would adapt to guidance or be replaced by alternatives that could accept supervision more gracefully. Looking at the impossible technologies that were becoming visible around the research station as his shuttle drew closer, Gorvek found himself grateful that humans had been chosen as the interface for this transition. Whatever else they were at least comprehensible enough to negotiate with. He wasn't sure the same could be said about their partners. 5 years had passed since the revelation of humanity's true nature shattered the galaxy's understanding of power, civilization, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. Dr. Kelthvar stood in what had once been the Galactic Council chambers, now transformed into the central coordination hub for advanced civilization interface operations. The changes went far beyond architectural modifications. Everything about galactic society had been restructured around principles that most species were still struggling to comprehend. The transformation had been remarkably peaceful, considering its scope. Once the initial shock of discovering humanity's actual role in galactic affairs had subsided, most species had found the integration process to be far more beneficial than they had anticipated. The technologies, medical advances, and social improvements that came with human guidance had eliminated most of the problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. But the psychological adjustment remained challenging for many individuals who had grown up believing they understood the nature of reality. Dr. Kelthvar came a familiar voice. "Thank you for agreeing to participate in today's progress assessment." She turned to see Director Harrison approaching, looking exactly the same as he had during those first terrifying negotiations 5 years ago. One of the more disconcerting aspects of human integration programs was discovering that human aging could be essentially suspended indefinitely, making it difficult to track the passage of time through familiar biological markers. "Director Harrison," she replied, noting that her own Zephyrian stress responses to his presence had diminished considerably over the years. "I must admit, your assessment timeline is quite convenient. I was just reviewing the integration progress reports. And what's your evaluation of how your species has adapted to the new circumstances?" Kelthvar considered the question carefully. The Zephyr integration zone had exceeded every development metric that human administrators had projected. Their population had grown by 30% through improved medical technology and enhanced reproduction protocols. Their technological capabilities had advanced by centuries in less than a decade. Their resource production had increased exponentially through access to dimensional harvesting and matter conversion techniques. Most importantly, their casualty rates from warfare, disease, resource conflicts, and social instability had dropped to essentially zero. From a purely statistical perspective, Zephyrian civilization has never been more successful, she admitted. Health, longevity, prosperity, security, technological advancement, and social stability have all improved beyond anything our species achieved during independent development. But, Harrison prompted, apparently detecting the reservation in her tone. But, we're no longer Zephyrian civilization in any meaningful sense, she replied. We're a human-administered development project that maintains Zephyrian cultural characteristics for psychological comfort. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. That's a very insightful analysis. Do you consider that necessarily negative? The question forced her to examine her own assumptions about identity, independence, and cultural development. Over the past 5 years, she had observed her species transform in ways that exceeded their wildest historical ambitions. Zephyrians were healthier, smarter, longer-lived, and more capable than they had ever been. Their art, science, and social structures had developed in directions that incorporated the best of their traditional approaches with innovations that exceeded anything they could have achieved independently. I'm